Erev Tov, everybody. A pleasure to welcome Avi Siegal. As you heard, he's live from New Haven, where he's a third year law student, and he previously attended Cambridge and Princeton, which is, I think, basically how we got to you through Princeton. And then before that in Yeshivat Haratzon, and he's too young to have things before that. We don't have to go to high school. I don't even know where he went to high school. But anyways, it's always a pleasure. We always like to have young people teaching Torah, the youth excitement. This week's Parshat Sara, Rev Soloveitchik's famous piece, that Sarah was 7 and 20 and 100 all at the same time. So youth and adulthood coming together. Okay, Vakasha Rav Avi, it's all yours.
Okay, so I am not Rav Avi and I'm not Avi Esquire, but I am very, very excited to be here. This is my second time teaching Torah in Motion, and I hope there'll be future times. It's always a big treat to join with everyone here. And yes, as was mentioned, I am in law school, which is these days it's, pardon me, that is a screen behind me in a university that just decided that it was going to wrap up, and it is done. I'm sorry about the noise. So yes, as mentioned, I am in law school, and that's shaping my approach to the topic. So the topic tonight, I've titled this year "The Resident Alien Then and Now," and the impetus, as we'll see, is this very interesting, much discussed line in towards the beginning of Parshat Chayei Sara, Ger v'tzoshav anochi imachem. So we'll get to it in just a moment. But thinking about this, for me right now, it comes from, partly I've taken courses recently in immigration law. So, if you think in that course about who is a citizen, who's allowed into the country, who is part of the body politic, these kinds of questions. So in that sense, I'm thinking about it. And also at the end, I'm hoping that we'll have a little bit of time just for me to give you all a sense of a really interesting discussion about the resident alien, the Ger Toshav, in halachic literature that occurred in an Israeli Supreme Court decision from just a few years back. So there is this. The topic is, so this is a Parsha year, but also there are implications that are Jewish legal and are also maybe legal in a more general sense. So with that introduction, we can begin. I will share my screen. That should take me just a moment. There we go. Sorry, forgive me. Okay. So I have the source sheet open. So I actually want to begin not with the Parsha, not with Chayei Sara, but a few prakim back. So not long after the Mabul, after the flood, in the 10th parak of Bereshit of Genesis, we read as follows. Ve'ela toldos b'nei Noach, Shem, Cham, Vayafet, Vayivaladu lahem banim achar Mabul. So after the Mabul, we're told that these are the generations of the sons of Noach. There's Shem, there's Ham, and there's Yafet. These are the three sons of Noach. And then we get a very, very long list of names. We hear about all of the different generations that came from Noach. But I raise this because I want us to have very specific context. So skipping to Pasuk Vav in Perek Yod of Breshit, we read there, Uvnei Cham, right? So the children of Noach's son Cham were Cush, Mitzrayim, Phut, and Canaan. Those are the four children of Cham. And the psukim go on and they tell us, who the children of Cush were, and who the children of Mitzrayim were, and who the children of Phut were. Then we get to pasuk Tedvav. Uchanan yaladet Sidon bechoro v'yet Chet. Canaan had as his firstborn Sidon, and also Chiti, right? This we associate Chiti with the Hittites, the historic people. So Chet was one of the children of Canaan, and then the psukim go on. We hear about a whole list of additional children of Canaan, and we're then told v'achar nafotzu mishpachot haKanani, and then subsequently the families of or who were from Canaan, all these different children, they dispersed in various directions. And this is actually written in the Psukim in the order. This is actually before Migdal Bavel. Regardless, we're told here that they spread out. And then Pasuk Yud Tet over there gives us the borders of the Canaanim. And Pasuk Kaf, we wrap up and we say, Eila v'necham l'mishpachotam l'ilshonotam bi'artzotam v'goyehem. So these are the children of Ham according to their families and their languages in their lands, v'goyehem, in their nations. And this, I think, also is very interesting. We're seeing here, from a very early point in Breshit, that from Noah came all of these different nations that then, dispersed into the land, into the lands, into the earth, throughout the earth. But I want to focus on Chet. Chet, I think, needs to be contextualized in this way. We have to think about the fact that, Chet is Ben Canaan, who is Ben Ham. And Chet then ends up showing up in our Parsha in a very significant way. So just a couple of key things to take from this. Again, first, Chet is a Canaani. He is the son of Canaan. And of course, Avram ends up going to Eretz Canaan. Eretz Canaan now, what we think of as Eretz Yisrael. That's the first thing to keep in mind. And the second thing is this really interesting word, Bigoyehem. Right, in their nations, that you have these different peoples that emerge, from Noah and then moving outwards from there. And one of those peoples comes from Chet. So with that in mind, we can move, I think, to Parak Chav Gimel of Breshit, also the beginning of our Parshat Chayei Sara. And we read as follows: Vayu Chayei Sara me'ah shana ve'esrim shana ve'sheva shanim shnei Chayei Sara. As Rabbi Kalman already said, it's a famous first pasuk. Many different ways to think about why we're told that Sarah, the years of Sarah's life were 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. But so Sarah's life was a life of 127 years. Vatamot Sarah b'Kiryat Arba. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba. Hi Chevron b'Eretz Canaan. Right, Kiryat Arba is the same place as Chevron. Where is it located? Be'eretz Canaan. Not surprising, we know that that's where Avram is located. Vayavo Avraham nispod l'sarav v'liv kota, and Avram comes to eulogize Sarah and to cry for her. And now things get interesting for our purposes. Vayakom Avraham me'al panei meito, vaydaber el bnei Chet lemor. So Avram literally gets up from above, from being close to his literally his dead one, but his close relative who had passed, Sarah, and then he goes and he speaks to the children of Chet. And it's just worth, I think, pausing there again. Bnei Chet has not come up, to my knowledge, in Breshit since Perek Yud, and we get Chet here in this category that's introduced all of a sudden of Bnei Chet, the children of Chet. And and I think also from our perspective, we should think about that term Bnei Chet in a way that's very similar to how we think about the term Bnei Yisrael. So we're of course very accustomed to speaking of Bnei Yisrael as a shorthand for the people of Israel. So Bnei Chet, in a similar way, is the people of Chet, right? Presumably, all of these people are not all of them literal children of Chet, who was the son of Canaan, who was the son of Noah. But this is the people, the goy, in the word of Perek Yud. This is the goy, this is the nation, the people that's come out of Chet. So that's whom Avram is now going to engage with. And he says as follows in a very famous pasuk, that's the impetus for the shir: Ger v'toshav anochi imachem, tenu li achuzat kever imachem, v'yekbera meti milefanai. Avram says, we'll just translate literally, Ger, usually say stranger or foreigner, v'toshav, and a resident is usually how we would translate that. Sometimes in older translations of the Chumash, you'll see sojourner, but we'll go with a stranger and a resident. Anochi imachem. I am with you. So with that preface, Avram then goes on to say, please give me a possession of land where I can bury my recently deceased loved one among you. And I bold some of these words here just because I think it pays to focus on them. So Gever Toshav Anochi, right? That's the identity of Avraham. Imachem, with you. So there's a distancing that occurs here. And then again, Tenu li achuzat kever imachem. This is something that I want to take possession of with you in your domain, your land. V'ekbera meiti, and I will bury my recently deceased loved one, mine, meiti, milefanai, again, before me. And then they go on, and we won't read the whole parak. There's no need. There's no need. But I want to just again emphasize some of these features of distancing. So pasuk hey, vayanu v'nei Chet et Avraham lemor lo. So the children of Chet respond to Avraham and they say as follows: Shema'enu Adoni, hear us, our master. Nesi Elohim atah b'tochenu. You are among us. So notice that word bitochenu, within us. You are a prince of God. In the choicest of our graves, bury your dead one, bury Sarah. None of us, note that word mimenu, no one from us will prevent you or will withhold from you a grave where you can bury Sarah. Vayakom Avraham, pasuk zayin, vayishtachu le'am haaretz livnei Chet. Avram gets up and he bows to the am haaretz. Very interesting term to use here. And who are the am haaretz? Bnei Chet. So that term am haaretz also deserves a little bit of thought for a moment. So am haaretz, when one sees that word in the literature of Chazal, that means someone who is of a lesser education, who is less careful with ma'asrot and things of that sort. But Am Haaretz here is clearly referring to Bnei Chet, right? Like the pasuk makes that as clear as possible. Vayishtachu la'am haaretz. Who is the Am Haaretz? Bnei Chet. So Am Haaretz here, if we translate it literally, it means quite simply the people of the land, or better, the nation of the land. And it's this that I really want to sit with for a moment. Abraham comes to Bnei Chet, and he does not have a grave or a place and any kind of ancestral location that where he can do the most basic or one of the most basic human activities, which is to bury a loved one who has passed. And he has to go and he has to ask those who are already there for a place, for property where he can do precisely that. But the whole story, and it goes on, and continuously we feel this, that Avraham is someone who is a stranger in this land, right? This land is Eretz Canaan. It's not Eretz Shem. Avraham is a descendant of Shem. This is Eretz Canaan, and Chet is a son of Canaan, and Bnei Chet are those who are descended ultimately from Canaan. They're the Am Haaretz. They have a very strong sense of belonging in this place, and it's Avram who has to negotiate and navigate his place and his role in this land. That's a strange land. It's in the words of the beginning of Lech Lecha, this is the Aretz Asher Areka. It's a land that he didn't know that God promised to show him. And so, with this in mind, this notion of Avraham vis-a-vis the Am Haaretz, I think we can now start to dive into this notion of the Ger Vitoshav Anochi Imachem. So let's begin. So again, with that framing of the psukim, and there's more, of course, in the parak to think about. There's other language. If we had unlimited time, we would march at great leisure through the psukim here. But there's more interesting language of this, the distancing, what's mine, what's yours. Afron is betoch b'nei chet. There's a lot of language about B'nai Ami, Am Haaretz, Meiti. So all just things that are worth having in mind on the pshat level of this opening to Parshat Chayei Sara. So we move along, and I want to just show you two ways in very prominent Rishonim, very prominent early commentators, of thinking about this pasuk, Ger v'toshav. Ger v'toshav anochi imachem, from the start of our parsha. So first there's Rashi, and Rashi says as follows: Ger v'toshav anochi imachem, ger me'eretz acheret, v'nityashavti imachem. A foreigner, a stranger from another land, and I came to reside imachem, with you, among you. That's Rashi's understanding of this term. As a matter of pshat, he's saying, I am both a ger and a toshav. I am a ger, I'm a stranger insofar as I came from somewhere else, but I also am a toshav because I have settled here, I'm entrenched here. Avram's wealthy, he has a lot of possessions at this point. That's Rashi's pshat understanding of ger v'toshav. Avram really is both. Rashi also adds, "V'midrash agadai quotes a medrash, im tirtzu hareini ger, v'im lav atlena min hadin, she'amar li akadosh baruch hu lizaracha etain et haaretz hazot." So according to this midrash, ger v'toshav is reflecting two different ways in which the acquisition of a grave, of a resting place, of a grave for Sarah could come to be. One option is im tirtzu, if, not in the sense of im tirtzu ein zo agada, this is precisely an agada, im tirtzu, if you so wish, if you agree, if you, the B'nai Chet, agree to sell this to me, hareini ger, then I will simply be to you, among you, as a stranger. V'im lav, but if you don't go along with me, then, and we don't get this in the psukim, but according to the midrash, there's this implicit threat of if you don't agree to sell this to me, atzlena min hadin, I will take it from you as a matter of right, right? I will take it, through law, as it were, through justice. How so? Rashi says, because God said to me, I will give this land to your offspring. And this is also really interesting. According to this medrash, what's implicit in this story at the beginning of Parshat Chayei Sara is the sense that Avram actually will eventually be the progenitor of, or perhaps that's the wrong way to put it, not that he eventually will be. Avram is now the progenitor of the future Am Haaretz. Bnei Israel will eventually be the Am Haaretz in Eretz Canaan. And it will go from being Eretz Canaan to being Eretz Yisrael. But of course, Eretz Yisrael, in a sense, is saying, it will become Eretz Avraham, or Eretz Shem, if you will. We don't have to go that way, says Avraham. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. But the hard way would be to say, I have a right here. God has made me a promise. And that's the sense of toshav that you get then from this midrash quoted by Rashi, that I actually do have a permanence here in this land to the extent that I have a promise. And that promise from God gives me a right to this place. Okay, so Rashi gives us two views, pshat view, midrashic view. The pshat view again is ger v'toshav, I am a stranger because I came from somewhere else. Toshav, because I now am settled here and I reside here. The midrash is, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, as it were. Okay. Then we have the Ramban. The Ramban Nachmanides adds a really nice twist to all of this, and I think we can think of it as a third way to understand ger v'toshav. Not Rashi's pshat way, not the midrashic way, another way. The Ramban says like this: ger v'toshav anochi imachem, haya haminhag liot lahem beit hakvarot ish lebeit avutav, v'sadek kfura echad yikberu bo kol hagirim. So says the Ramban, It was the custom at that time that peoples in the land of Canaan, just generally, would have. So we have the term here, Beit Kvarot, which is not easy to translate. It could mean a mausoleum. It could mean generally maybe just like a particular section of a cemetery, or it's just a cemetery. But the point here is that there would be some kind of plot of graves that would be set aside each the Beit Avotav. For any given family, they would have their place of burial. In addition to that, v'sadek v'ura achad yikburu bo kol hagerim. Anyone who was a ger, anyone who was a stranger, a foreigner, anyone who didn't have roots in the land and didn't have ancestors in the land, they would be buried, but they would all be buried in one place, not in a way that's marked out by their identity, their nationality. This is the place for gerim. That's where they would go. And so the Ramban then says, Avraham was not interested in that. Avraham did not want Sarah to be buried in the cemetery, right, the single cemetery for the Gerim. And I should just note here for a moment, for just a point of clarification. One of the challenges of this topic of Ger v'toshav is that the terms are very flexible terms. So we nowadays, I'm sure many of us who are in this shir, you hear the term ger and you think convert. You might also hear the term ger and think of how the Torah in general is very hospitable and loving towards strangers. That might be the things that one thinks of. It becomes a little tricky because when we analyze both the psukim and also the halachic sources, these terms take on like a particular halachic meaning. And in any given source, it doesn't always mean the same thing as somewhere else. So I want to just kind of name that. But we're working right now with the psukim and we're working with the Ramban. So here right now, ger in the Ramban just means a foreigner, someone who's not from this land. Okay, we can go on now on the Ramban. The Ramban says, "V'hinei Avraham Amar el bnei Chet, Ani ger me'eretz acheret." Avram said to the children of Chet, "I am a stranger from another land. V'lo hinchalti me'avutai beit hakvarot ba'aretz hazot." And I did not inherit from my ancestors a plot of graves, let's say, in this land. V'hinei ata, behold now, ani toshav imachem. I am a resident with you or among you. Ki chafatzti lashevet bi'aretz hazot, because I desired to settle in this land. V'lachein tnu kever liot li la'achuzat olam ke'echad mikem. So Avram's ask, his request is, please give me a possession of land where I can bury my dead, where I can bury Sarah, ke'achad mikem, just like you, to be just like you. And so there's a very strong sense that one gets from the Ramban that it's not so much that Avraham wants to be part of Bnei Chet. I think that's very important to stress. He's not saying, I want to join your and I want to bury my dead along with yours. No. But he's also not saying, I want to just be considered a ger. No, neither that. Avram wants his own place. Avram wants his own identity as a people. And so he says, I want to have my own Beit Kvarot for my wife. One assumes, for we'll see for himself and for his descendants. And then he will be Ke'achad Mikem, he will be another goy, another with a real place, a real identity in the land. Okay, so far we have three definitions or three attempts at explaining this term, this phrase ger v'toshav. We saw two in Rashi. We saw this one in the Ramban. Okay, so now we're going to return soon to the psukim. Usually, I think when you bring in a passage from Rav Soloveitchik, you're supposed to do it at the end. You're supposed, you build up all kinds of things, you put all kinds of sources on the table, and then the Rav really ties things together in a beautiful way with philosophical flair. I'm not going to do it that way. I think it's really nice to present the Rav's understanding of Ger V'Toshav along with the other Mefarshim. Okay, so we saw two explanations in Rashi, one in the Ramban, and we'll see that the Rav in a way is picking up on elements of it, but he has his own version of it. And I also just I think he's on the call. I want to thank my Chavrusa Yehuda Kozlo who reminded me about this passage. So this is in Rav Soloveitchik's essay Confrontation. Of his essays, it's probably one of the most famous. This is where he speaks about, well, he speaks for a long time about other things, but you realize eventually it's all a way of getting to this question of interfaith dialogue. And where the Rav basically comes down is he says that to speak with people of other faiths in interfaith dialogues, but to speak with them about issues of faith, issues of religion, nisht. Doesn't he thinks it's inappropriate for reasons that he explains. He thinks it's very important that we retain our sense of self, our own religious worlds in a way that is independent. The Rav also does say in a well-known addendum that that's not to say that all forms of dialogue with other peoples of other faiths is something that we should avoid. That's also not the case. He thinks that there's a lot of productive work to do with people of other faiths that's religiously motivated. He just worries about dialogue about religion. I think that's a reasonable summary. Maybe Rabbi Kalman will have will want to tweak this or that. Okay, so that's some brief background on the essay. I just want to share with you this passage. It's, of course, as usual, it's beautiful, but also I think it adds a new dimension or a different dimension to what we're discussing. So says the Rav, pretty deep into this essay Confrontation. Our approach to and relationship with the outside world has always been of an ambivalent character, intrinsically antithetic, bordering at times on the paradoxical. I was cautioned beforehand that I should be careful and make sure to translate all of the Hebrew into English, but no one told me I should translate the Rav into English, so I'm not going to. But if anyone wants anything in particular translated, I will. Antithetic is in the sense of an antithesis, right? Intrinsically oppositional. Okay. So what does he mean? We cooperate, he says, with the members of other faith communities in all fields of constructive human endeavor, but simultaneously, with our integration into the general social framework, we engage in a movement of recoil and retrace our steps. In a word, we belong to the human society, and at the same time, we feel as strangers and outsiders. We are rooted in the here and now reality as inhabitants of our globe, and yet we experience a sense of homelessness and loneliness as if we belonged somewhere else. And he goes on to our Parsha. Our first patriarch Abraham already introduced himself in the following words: I am a stranger and sojourner with you, ger v'toshav anochi imachem. And the Rav asks, is it possible to be both ger v'toshav at the same time? And then he asked a further question, which is it's a question that he likes to ask in many places. Is not this definition absurd, since it contravenes the central principle of classical logic that no cognitive judgment may contain two mutually exclusive terms? This is what's usually known as the principle of non-contradiction. It sounds fancy, but it's a very intuitive idea. You can't believe yes and no. You can't believe something is and something is not. That doesn't work. You can't believe two things that are opposites. And yet the Rav goes on to say here, as he does elsewhere, the Jew of old defied this time-honored principle and did think of himself in contradictory terms. He knew well in what areas he could extend his full cooperation to his neighbors and act as a toshav, a resident, as a sojourner, and at what point this gesture of cooperation and goodwill should terminate, and he must disengage as if he were a ger, a stranger. And he goes on for a little bit. So I include the rest of the passage there. So this is interesting, and this offers us a fourth perush, a fourth explanation of Ger v'toshav anochi imachem. The Rav is saying that Ger v'toshav anochi imachem, contrary to the two explanations in Rashi or in the Ramban, it's not that Aram is a ger and toshav in a way that is compatible. the Rav actually embraces, as he tends to, a sense of incompatibility, of dissension and tension, and even seeming contradiction. He would say contradiction even. He said he embraces that contradiction, and he says that it's that contradiction of being at once at home and not at home, of being a resident and not a resident. That is precisely the religious experience, he would say, of the Jew of old and really of the Jew always. This is the claim there, and you can see how this would, this contributes to this, this attitude towards interfaith dialogue as well. That we have to know, when we should be a toshav and see ourselves as a resident and engaging with those who are living with us, just like one of them. And we also have to understand when the element of us that is a ger, that is different, that is foreign, that is strange, should come to the fore, and where we should say, no, we're not going to go farther as far as dialogue goes. We're not going to go farther as far as coming close goes. We have our own distinct identity. Okay. So again, that would be a very nice place to end this year, but we're just getting started. So that's again, that's a fourth perush that I think is worth having in mind of ger v'toshav. And hopefully you can see how this, insofar as it's about identity and peoplehood and the like, it really is connected to the pshat as we analyzed it at the very beginning of this year. Okay. So towards the end of Parshat Chayei Sara, Avram takes as a wife Keturah, who's usually identified as Hagar. And then we get more generations, more children listed. And then the just as the parsha began with Vayu Chayei Sara, Vatamot Sara, the parsha here now towards the end tells us Ve'ela in Parak Kaf Hey Pasuk Zayin, Ve'ela Yemei Shnei Chayei Avraham Asher Chai. Here are the years of Avraham, Me'at Shana v'Shivim Shana v'Chamesh Shanim. Okay, Avram lived to the ripe old age of 175. Vayigva, Avram expired. Vayamot Avraham b'seva tova zaken v'saveya vayasef el amav. Avraham died in a good old age, ripe and satisfied. Then you have this really interesting phrase, vayasef el amav. Literally, we would translate it as he was gathered up to his people. We'll return to it in a moment. So we're told that Avram's two sons, Yitzchak and Yishmael, they buried him where? El Me'arat HaMachpelah, in this cave of Machpelah, which is what? Which is in the field of Ephron ben Sochar HaChiti, of Ephron, the son of Tzochar, who is a Chiti, who is one of Bnei Chet, Asher al Panei Mamre, Nir Elonei Mamre. Okay, so there's nothing that's new to us there. This will probably be familiar to many of us who are familiar with these Parshiot and Breshit. But again, we're seeing that Avraham now is, like, as he dies, he gets to be buried with Sarah independently in their own place. Okay, so this phrase "Vayasef el Amav" is so interesting, and it does repeat in this very perek. So at the very end of the parsha, we read, after hearing about the generations of Yishmael, Eilahem b'nei Yishmael ve'ela shmotam b'chatzrehem uftirotam shnei masar nesim le'umotam. So that's just summing up the sons of Yishmael and their names. 12 different Nisiim, and we could note the word that I didn't bold, but perhaps I should have, le'umotam. Now, these are the various sons, le'umotam, according to their nations, right? Uma, which is right here with an aleph, but very similar word to the word am with an ayin. They were buried according to their different nations. So from Yishmael come different peoples, different nations that are all ultimately Yishmaeli. And then we read, second to last pasuk of the parsha, Ve'ela shnei chayei Yishmael. The years of Yishmael were Me'at shana u'shloshim shana v'sheva shanim, 137 years. Vayigva vayamos, he expired and he died. Vayasef el amav, he was gathered up to his people. So just where I think again it pays to pause on this phrase Vayasef Elamav before we move on, because this does bookend the the parsha, right? We start off with Avraham as the Gever Toshav engaging with the Am Haaretz of Bnei Chet, and now at the end when Avraham dies, um, and also Yishmael dies, the son of Avraham dies. We're told for both of them, Vayasef Elamav, they were gathered up to their people. This phrase sometimes I've seen in the past that there are those who actually try to understand this as saying that what occurred here was something in accordance with an ancient Jewish burial practice that after the body had decomposed for some time, the bones were gathered up and were joined up, were gathered, and then were brought to be with the other bones in the grave. So that's one way of understanding those, that phrase, Vayasef Elamad. He was, gathered up to his nation. I think a simpler understanding, a more pshat level understanding is simply that, he was gathered up to his nation. Insofar as he was buried together with his family in a Beit Kvarot, which is, Ish LeBeit Avotav in the case of Abraham, in a place of burial that belongs to him, he was now brought to be together with his nation, his people. And it's definitely quite striking also then to see that Yishmael, at least right, certainly from the Psukim, Yishmael was not buried in Marat HaMachpelah, but nonetheless by Yasef Alamav. So Yishmael is developing his own identity as a separate goy, and that goes back to last week's parsha when Yishmael along with Hagar are sent away initially. There, Hagar is told that Ishmael will be a great goy, and so these different nations are now kind of developing their distinct identities here in Breshit by Asaf El Amav. So I think again, just it's worth having this latter part of the parsha in mind when we think about the meaning of Ger V'Toshav. Okay.
Is it the two-state solution? Asif El Amav.
Okay. You're saying that there are two of them, right? There's Vayasef Elamav one state and Vayasef Elamav a second state.
Yes.
Okay. All right, all right. Well, we might have some occasion to think about that a little bit more towards the end of this year. Thank you, Mr. Hepner. Okay, so now I want to just quickly run through three very, very famous psukim. These are not in our parsha, but they're worth having in mind because of in general they're very important psukim, so they're important to have in mind. But also there's a particular point that I'd like to make in this context. So these three psukim I'm going to run through here, essentially, we can nuance them, but essentially are all making the same point. First, Shmot, Exodus. Perek Chaf Gimel Pasuk Tet. V'ger lo tilchatz v'atem yidatem es nefesh hager ki gerim hayitem b'eretz Mitzrayim. Right, you shall not oppress a ger, stranger, we'll say. V'atem, so that literally means and, but maybe because, for, after all, you know well the nefesh, the soul of the ger, of the stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Mitzrayim, in the land of Egypt. It's a famous notion. And it repeats a couple of times. So now we can look at Vayikra Leviticus Parak Yud Tet. And there we're told, when there is a stranger who sojourns with you, who lives among you, lo tonu oto, you shall not oppress him. Rather, ke'ezrach mikem yelachem hager, hagar yitzachem. Like any citizen among you should be this ger who is living among you. V'ahavta kamocha, and you should love him as yourself. Ki gerim hayitem eretz Mitzrayim, ani Hashem Elokechem, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And again, Devarim, in Deuteronomy, Parak Yud Pasuk Yotet, V'ahavtem et hager, you shall love the ger, the stranger. Ki gerim hayitem eretz Mitzrayim, because you were strangers in the land of Mitzrayim. Okay, so beautiful sentiment, deserving of its own class by itself. And odds are many of you are very, very familiar with these psukim. Why do I bring them up?
I interrupt and ask a question, please?
Please, yes.
Oh, as you're reading all of these, I'm struck by the fact that if they didn't have the nikudot, if they were unvowelized, it would be the ahavta et hagar. And are we supposed to think of this in terms of the oralized Torah? And of course we know that the next in future psukim after Sarah is buried and he has paid her, that he goes to Keturah, who isn't named as Hagar, and I think that that's possibly, and I'm wondering, and I'm asking you, if it could possibly be because we've been dealing with the Ger Toshav, we've been dealing with the dichotomy of the distance and the closeness. We've been dealing with being a stranger and being among others. We've been dealing with the fact that you have to beg these strangers to bury your closest other with them. I mean, you're right. There are so many dichotomous things that we're having to bear in our minds, the yes and no of Rav Soloveitchik, like we're carrying them at the same time. So maybe we couldn't call Hagar, because he couldn't have remarried or become close with Hagar, the stranger. Maybe he couldn't have done that then after we're dealing with the Hagar again and again. It just hit me as you're reading that. If we take away the vowels, we're dealing with your famous word.
That's a very, very interesting idea. I like that a lot. And I can even just, I'll build on it a little bit and say, like what we left out from Chayei Sara, right? We just spoke about the beginning of the Parsha, which is again, Sarah's death and Avram, purchasing land where Sarah and their descendants can be buried. And then the very end, Avram's death. And as you point out, just before Avram's death, we're told that Avram took Keturah as a wife, who perhaps is Hagar. But in the middle of the Parsha, there's this whole story of Abraham, sending his Eved, whom we identify as Eliezer, to go and to fetch a wife for his son Yitzchak, and that takes up pretty much
Huge.
The second aliyah through the sixth aliyah of the parsha. And that too, I think, fits with what you're saying. There's a sense in which Abraham wants to be rooted in this land, but he wants the right kind of wife for his son, because he doesn't want to just become like the rest of the people. He doesn't want to join Bnei Chay, doesn't want to join the others. He wants to be shaping an independent identity, and to do that, he needs the right kind of person. Maybe even if you want to go back to the more kind of tribal sense of it, he wants someone who's from Shem, right? Not someone who's from Ham. So that I think fits with what you're saying really nicely. I love that point about Hagar as Hagar. It's something that had occurred to me recently also, and I imagine that the two of us are not the first people to think of it.
Also,
yeah.
mention not shame. As we're talking, and we were talking about when you went all the way back to Bnei Noach, and I thought, it's Canaan who was cursed by Noach, and yet all of these chates and the Bnei Chet and the Bnei Chet, so we're dealing with at least 3 generations post Noach, post cursed Canaan. And maybe that's the reason that Abraham has to have the Rav Soloveitchik's dichotomy. He has to be, yes, I want to be one of them, but no, I don't want to be one of them. And maybe that's it. He doesn't go, he is going to the cursedness of Canaan. And because you went all the way back to Noah, I'm thinking, Noah cursed one son, and it wasn't Ham, surprisingly. Canaan. And here we have Canaan, Chet, Bnei Chet, and Bnei Chet. So he can't be close to them, can he?
Sorry, I just missed the very last point.
I said, so he can't be too close to them, can he?
Right. No, I think that's certainly correct. Which just like you're saying, it goes back to this question of I want to be somewhat closer, but I don't want to be too close. I want to retain my distance. So I'll say now 2 things. One which will be connected to what you're saying, and then one which is veering back. So I think once you bring in this Hagar connection, I think it's also worth just pointing out that Hagar, we're told in last week's parsha, Hagar is a Shifcha Mitzrit. Hagar is an Egyptian maidservant. And then, that makes even more resonance, I think, this connection to being a ger in Mitzrayim, right? We were Hagar in
Mm,
Mitzrayim.
mhm.
So we could develop that further, I'm sure. But then also, I just wanted to say, because I think you're helping us bring out that Avraham really is, if we stop and think about Breshit, Avraham is the paradigmatic ger.
Mhm.
Abraham is the original person who came from a different land and sought to establish himself and was trying to figure out how to both kind of live among others who are different from him, in a way that let him coexist easily with them, but also gave him like the space to carve out his own identity the way that he wanted to for his people. And so I would just, frankly, I wanted to bring these psukim in part just as a question, because it occurs to me that one reason to love the ger is because Avraham was a ger. We know from Avraham what it was to be a ger. Ger v'toshav anuchi imachem, you think about the Rav, you think about others. So that's all just to say that when we think about being a ger in Mitzrayim, I think we should also think back further, and we should think back to Avraham as the ger in Eretz Canaan. And that lets me segue, I think, into one more really interesting uh, place in the Chumash. There are a lot of places where the terms ger and toshav appear in Chumash and in Tanakh generally, but I want to just point out some quick, interesting pieces of Vayikra Perek Kafeh, the 25th chapter of Leviticus. Um, and some of the verses here are very important for the later halachic, the Jewish legal literature about the ger, the toshav, the ger toshav. But let's just quickly take a look at some of these psukim. So in pasuk kaf gimel of that parak, we're told, and the context here generally is we're speaking about Shemitah, about the seventh year of the land and the land lying fallow. And we're also told about the Jubilee, the Yovel year. But then we're told, V'ha'aretz lo timacher litzmitut, ki li ha'aretz, ki gerim v'toshavim atam imadi. So God commands that the land, no land, no piece of property should be sold in perpetuity, forever. There should be no land that we add as a condition that it never goes back to its owner, not even in the Yovel year. No. God says, Ki li haaretz, because this land belongs to me. Ki girim v'toshavim atem imadi, because each of you is a ger v'toshav with me, with God. And you really can't miss that this is so clearly echoing Parshat Chayei Sara at the beginning. Just as Avram said, Ger v'toshav anochi imachem, with you b'nei chet, God says, you b'nei Yisrael, you readers of Chumash in 2025, you have to understand, Ki gerim v'toshavim atem imadi. You have the status of being a stranger and a foreigner with me. And then the psukim go on. So we'll return to that idea in just a moment. The psukim here go on. Pasuk lamed hey, it pays to spend some time with. Here we're told v'chiyamuch achicha umata yado imach. So we'll translate that as if your brother, if your fellow becomes poor and he becomes disadvantaged along with you, ve'echezakta bo, you shall strengthen him, ger v'toshav, leave that there, v'cha imach, and he shall live with you. So v'cha imach, this is traditionally understood to refer to a mitzvah lahachayot. There is a commandment to help ensure sustenance and life for your impoverished brother, and ger v'toshav. So the pasuk is a little hard to read, to be honest. You see ger v'toshav shows up here, but if it's a ger v'toshav in addition to achicha, to your brother, who you're supposed to strengthen in his time of need and be mechayah him and sustain him, grammatically, to us, it would make much more sense if it said v'chiyamuch achicha o gercha o toshavcha umata yado, and it would go on. the pasuk doesn't do that. Regardless, at least Rashi here understands that we should basically read it as though the pasuk says achicha o gercha o toshavcha. So Rashi says ger v'toshav af imhu ger v'toshav, even if he is a stranger or a resident. And then Rashi says ve'ezehu toshav, who is the toshav? Kol shekibel alav shelo la'avod avodat elilim ve'ochel nevelot. A toshav, according to Rashi, the way he defines it here, is it's anyone who has accepted upon himself not to worship idols, but nonetheless who eats nevelot, who eats unslaughtered animal carcasses which are not kosher. And the proof text for that a ger does that's elsewhere in the Chumash, where we're told la ger titnana v'achala. But this is important to see here, that Rashi identifies the toshav as a halachic matter as someone who lives among you and has been makabel, has received upon himself not to worship idols, but nonetheless he still is ochel nevelot, he still eats unslaughtered carcasses. So let me stop here for a moment again and just take stock. So if you receive the source sheet, you will see that I included many sources. I tend to not know how quickly I will move and how much trouble I will have, in terms of going too fast. And so I see that we've had plenty of time here just for the first few pages. So of course we're not gonna see everything. I hope that those who want to dive deeper into this topic, though, will take advantage of the source sheet. I spend time. I look at some of the key sugyas in the Talmud Bavli, in the Babylonian Talmud, where the identity of the ger toshav, which becomes an independent concept, not just a ger or a toshav, as it seems to be so often in Tanakh, but the ger toshav becomes this independent concept. And I should just say, because we've talked about this for this amount of time, the ger toshav, usually, for those who don't know, is usually understood to be someone who accepted upon themselves the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 commandments of Noach, which we don't have to go through right now, but sort of like basic morality. They've accepted upon themselves, and they accept not to worship idols. And such a person we allow to live among ourselves in Bnei Israel. The Rambam, Maimonides, has frequently talks about the ger toshav, and that certainly is his understanding, that it's someone who's accepted upon themselves to not who's accepted upon themselves the 7 mitzvot of Bnei Noach, but also to add on here the and now that was part of our title. It seems from the Rambam, from Maimonides, that this law, that this din of ger toshav does not apply nowadays. He says, and he's following a Gemara in Masachet Erechim. So this is moving us right down here. The Gemara in Erechim, Daf Kaftet Amud Aleph says, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Ein ger toshav noheg, ela bizman she'ayovel noheg. He says, and he bases it, as the Gemara goes on to say, on a gzeira shava, on a comparison of psukim. He says this notion of ger toshav, all of the laws that are associated with this person who is not quite one of Bnei Israel, but also not an idolater, someone in this kind of in-between category, those laws were only practiced in a time when Yovel, the Jubilee, is practiced. And that's not the case now, and so seemingly it's no longer applicable. The Ravid, who is the Rabbi Avraham ben David of Poskier, the Ravid who constantly comments on the Rambam, he seemingly disagrees. It seems like he thinks actually that for certain things, ger toshav, this category of the person who is in this in-between category, not quite part of an Israel, not quite an idolater, in between, that those laws actually are still in force. They're still applicable. There's a lot of very interesting things that happen in the Rambam, but I want to just close with this, and then be happy to take some questions. And also, if anyone wants to talk more about any of this, welcome to be in touch. There's a really interesting and tricky discussion that occurred in a judicial opinion, really dueling judicial opinions of two Israeli Supreme Court justices just a few years back. I believe it was 4 years ago, but I have to check that. So this is the Israeli Supreme Court ruling on the legality, the constitutionality, I should say, of this nation state law, which was passed in 2018 in Israel. It's a basic law, which means that it's sort of it's part of the constitutional framework in Israel. It has constitutional status. And that law basically declared that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. And to many of us, that will seem intuitive, but it was understood to have certain far-reaching consequences. And it was something that certainly the minorities in Israel, the Arab population, was very disturbed by this. And in one of the concurring opinions, one of the opinions that agreed that that this basic law was constitutional, Justice Neil Hendel, who went to Flatbush Yeshiva, he is quite learned in general, brings in a lot of Mishpat Ivri, Jewish law, into his opinions. So he has a whole section where he talks about the halachic development of this category of the Ger Toshav. And he explains, there's this notion of ger tzedek, right, which is that's our classic notion of a convert. But there's also the ger toshav, and he says, and very appropriately, he says, hachovot klape ger toshav kolalot et zuchuyotav. The obligations we have to the ger toshav, right, to this person who is in this kind of minority who has certain like legal status in our country, but is not quite a citizen, not quite one of Am Yisrael. Yes, there are obligations to him, and there are certain rights that such a person has. And he brings in Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch and Rav Kook. He brings in the Ramban. It's really extraordinary. This is a secular legal opinion, but it has mishpat ivri. It has Jewish law baked into it. All ideas that that are from halacha, but ultimately are from ger v'toshav anochi imachem. And he goes on and he explains that modern day poskim have different views about whether the current minorities in Israel should be understood as a ger toshav. He doesn't himself try to offer psak. Then you see that there was a response. So there was a Christian Arab justice named George Kara, who's no longer on Israel's Supreme Court. But he was very disturbed by this. He said as follows. He said, "Hamiyut Aravi v'Hadruzi b'Yisrael." This Arab and Druze minority in Israel. Miyut Yilidai, the minority of my birth. Sheino ger toshav ozar, which he says, we're not a ger toshav and not a zar, not a stranger. We might use in the biblical sense, we might use the word ger. He says, for us, he says we're very disturbed. Right, we are mitkomem al hadrato v'al shlilat hayota shel medinat Yisrael gam medinato. Right, he says we said we see this law, this basic law, the nation state law, as a threat, as a negation of our place in this state, in this land. And he goes on for a bit. He quotes a little bit from Arabic. Okay, so I don't mean to end on a political note, but I do think it's very important to realize that these notions of ger toshav, these questions about that Avraham had of dual identity, of identities in between of one's political affiliation and association. These are questions that, of course, reverberate throughout the generations, and the halachic and biblical discussions of these questions of being a ger v'toshav, being a ger toshav, they can both inform us, and also perhaps to some degree they should caution us, and we should remember ki gerim v'toshavim atem imati. Thank you very, very much.
Do you happen to know whether Rav Kook paskins like the Raavad or like Rambam?
I wish I knew the answer. I can take us down quickly to Hashofet Hendel, to Justice Hendel's piece over here, and he says simply, so I think there is more to say about Rav Kook on this front, and this is a topic that I'm like myself that I've done a fair bit of research, but there's so much to learn about it. So I don't have the answer, unfortunately, off the top of my head. What Justice Hendel says, quoting Rav Kook, is simply that he understands Hekirahu kitoshav, you recognize someone as a toshav, and Rav Kook glosses that as li'inyan kiruv hadat v'hachofesh hazchuyot haruyot la'adam, right? To see someone, to recognize someone as a toshav is to see them as having kind of being similar of mind and of having, freedom and for free exercise of the rights that are, that are appropriate for a person. So this is something that's brought in there by Justice Hendel, but on the Rambam Ravid question about whether Ger Toshav is still noheg, I'm not sure. I intend to find out.
Thank you.
Okay. Yossi, Ben, you have a question?
Yes. It's not surprising that Rabbinic Judaism wants to treat the ger properly, because Rabbinic Judaism is a product of the Golah. And when you're a minority in a majority culture, you want to be treated well. And so it's good that you say your tradition does it. But I understand, and I've been going to a class on Thursday about the Rav's Avot motifs, the Rav being Soloveitchik, but I will contend that part of his motif is exactly why Orthodox Judaism didn't build the land. If I'm simultaneously, history is alive to me and I'm dealing with the Avot and it's a continuous chain, I don't miss it. I don't work towards it the same way if I would if I'm saying I'm not connected directly to the Avot, and I'm not part of that history, and it's a huge void that has to be corrected. It gives you the chance to say, well, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob are part of my thing. One of the things that people who revere the Rav too much do, in my opinion, especially if we're doing it academically, is what's missing here? What's the fault here? What doesn't this do? And being that kind of Rav-like thing is why, Islam says the here and now. That's one of the reasons why they're so powerful, because they say, who cares that we owned Spain 400 years ago? We have to own it now. And forget about whether we have a connection to it or don't living today. We need that physical connection today. And that's one of the reasons, and I understand why, because they were a majority religion in many parts wherever they were, whether in retreat or in growth. We made a mistake. The guys who rejected halakha and rejected the Rav's vision are the ones who built the land, who came there, who said it's not enough for me to open my Gemara and my Chumash Friday night and Saturday, and I'm in the... No, it's learn how to farm, have pretend farms in Europe, go to Palestine, buy the land. That's what does it. And that's not what the Rav's philosophy advocated for until the state was born.
So would you advocate that we should just be toshavim, or do you think that we should be occupying that space of being both gerim and toshavim?
I think we should certainly have no apologies for owning and being the sovereigns there. Certainly no apologies for saying this is a Jewish state that tolerates a minority, and a minority, no matter where you are, will never be as comfortable as a majority. Look, I live in Canada. Canada's great. But if I'm an Orthodox Jew working for a multinational, I don't want to be posted in up northern Ontario because I can't get kosher food, and it's not that they're prejudiced against me. It's the fact that I'm a minority makes my position less comfortable than the majority that says I can get pork in North Bay. So what's the problem? I can't get a minion in North Bay unless maybe that I can. I can't get kosher food. I can't get kosher restaurant. So it's not that they're prejudiced against me. And you have to work. So in Israel, I think you have to say, we're the masters. As the French say, maître chon nous, however you pronounce it. We are the owners. You don't like Shabbos off? Too effing bad, but that's the day we want off.
Mhm.
You don't like Hanukkah? You want to celebrate Christmas or something else? The Ben Gurion Airport is over there.
All right. Well, it sounds like we could probably fit you into the second opinion in Rashi, right? The Midrash Agada, where he said, "Im lo tirtzu, then atlena min hadin." So, I think that would fit with that parish certainly.
I
Thank
think
you.
it's a complicated, why basically the Orthodox community, didn't build the land. It's much more complicated than that. And the truth of the matter is, Mark Shapiro is giving class every Monday night on Rav Cook's book. And in the book, he kind of addresses that a little bit, Rav Cook, about that fact that or the Hamonam sort of was for building the state of Israel. The people, learning people. That's not wasn't their mind.
Yes, but Mark Shapiro does deal with everything, both what it does and what its failures to do are, because he keeps that academic motif.
No,
Your
listen.
Thursday
Why do you
lecture,
think
as
Rav
much as
Cook?
I enjoy
Yes.
it, doesn't do that.
No, that's why Rav Kook saw such value in the secular Zionists, because he saw them doing something very holy that the quote unquote the observant people were not doing. And he said, okay, there that's why really he was so close to them, and that made him, of course, controversial. But it's exactly it was the secular had this holy insight and this these sparks of what's needed in our time, and the observant people didn't have it. Correct. Anyways, more complicated, but okay. That's the history of Zionism. Why what? That's a complicated issue, as it always is. Okay, Rav Avi, I know I just call you Rav Avi because that's the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says if you learn even one letter from somebody, so you're called to call them Rebbe. So thank you very much. And a pleasure having you. And Shabbat Shalom. Enjoy New Haven. Then
Thank you so much. Thank you,
how
everyone.
many Jews are in the law school, if I can ask? I'm just curious. In your class, how many
How many
how many
Jews?
firm Jews are there in your
Firms is
class?
not so many, and
Not so many. I figured not so many.
it's an average of one or two a year.
That's it. And in the
Maybe
whole
maybe two a
campus,
year is fair. The whole campus, it's quite a few more.
And
You
in the
know,
law schools in Israel, to prove my point, but where
well,
you're going to be comfortable continually in Hebrew U, whatever, you'll find a lot more Jews of your kind and Jews of other kinds.
yeah, it's true. It's true. But
That's what
some
being a
of us
majority
also,
is about.
right, right. Some of us like the tension of being both the ger and toshav. There's something productive about that tension. Yeah.
okay, very good. All right. Tomorrow morning, everybody's welcome to my shir on the Siddur, 9:25. We switched last week with the switch in time, 9:25 tomorrow morning on Siddur. Then all our classes next week, beginning with Rabbi Liebtag, of course, 11:15. And next week, I'll send out actually in the next day or so, Shuli Missions beginning a new series next Thursday on Israel of the 1950s, talking about Zionism, etc. So that will begin Thursday at 12 noon. That's sort of her usual time when she teaches. And then all the regular classes, I think 12 classes next week. So we look forward to learning with you. With invite a friend. Shabbat Shalom, and everybody be well. And thank you very much. And Laila Tov. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
תודה רבה.